I was going to dive into some more custom build stuff that we were going to do, a couple projects, but I haven't gotten into it this week. And I'm going to talk about some service stuff. I've got parts all over my desk right now and some things I'm working on. And so I thought I would just share that stuff because it's all kind of some interesting. So throughout the week, we have different service projects that come in, and I've saved some of them we can chat about. Some of these are bikes that are in stands right now, whether mine or our other workstations, where we've got some parts out of them right now. So the timing's kind of good to do some show and tell with some service parts and issues. If you have any questions or comments on what I'm showing, type it into the chat and we'll work toward that. Otherwise, 15, 20 minutes of some variety of stuff that I'll share. So I'll start with, I guess, some stuff off the bike that I was in the middle of working on. Had somebody bring in a bike that the dropper collar had backed off of it, and I don't know how long they rode it with the collar backed off. You grab this here, right? So here's your dropper. It's this collar right here. Anyway, that is, this is on a 1-up, and it actually has a nice seal and stuff on it, a wiper seal like a suspension fork would have. But there was a lot of debris in it. I mean, it was, the grease had basically turned to kind of like a clay type material in it because of all the dust that had accumulated. And luckily, we actually had a service kit in for it. So these are, right, little spacers in there. This is a little plastic spacer that actually has some keyways built into it. You can see, I think, kind of how dirty that was. These are little keyway needles that are in there. I'm trying to show that. This one's actually bent. So this post had some drag to it. Here's a couple of the other ones. So we replaced these, and it's actually not that common that we would have a service kit for a dropper post in. I'm not sure why we might have had this one. We might have ordered one in because we thought we were going to service somebody's and they didn't service it or something. But yeah, we actually had one in. So we serviced it. We replaced the parts in it. It's working again. And it actually needs a new cable housing as well. And then if you haven't, not aware of these, Jaguar, we use a lot of their cable kits on stuff, depending on what it is. Not their basic ones, but if we have one of their cable kits, it's the Pro cable kits. And they have a new Pro dropper cable kit. Their previous one was basically shift housing, and they have a new one with a thinner housing and thinner cable. Probably a good idea. Some of the bends in the frames to get up into the seat tube, in the bottom of the seat tube, are pretty tight. So, and then we're seeing bikes where this stuff's getting routed in through the headset and that type of thing now as well. So, but yeah, so those are pretty handy. We're going to use that, replace the cable on it. This cable, it's pretty much locked up, like seized up, the cable in the housing. And so we'll replace both of them. Actually, one other thing on this bike, we did the fork service on it too. These foam rings, a little bit of Cuyuna in there. We can tell if somebody's riding Cuyuna or Tioga or whatever a lot. Any of those like reclaimed mine type of trails or whatever with all the red dirt, it ends up all over and everything in the bike. So that's on one of them. One other, actually, I think, yeah, so we're waxing a chain too for that one. On SRAM drives, if you have a nicer SRAM bike and you're replacing the chain, and like this bike has an XO crank on anyway, but the back end of it is GX, there's only like a $30 difference between the chain prices, which is less than half of a GX chain anyway, to just upgrade it to an XO chain. And I think in the old days we thought that was silly to do, but with this stuff here in your cassettes and your chain rings being so expensive for these bikes, even derailleur pulleys on these derailleurs are expensive. I I think they're as much as a GX chain. So anyway, there's data out there from people that test chain lubes and whatnot, like zero friction cycling, that shows that the XO chains last a lot longer. I think anywhere like 2 to 3 times, depending on what it is. So anyway, we're waxing a chain, and actually the XO chains have a better coating on them as well. So when you're stripping all of the oils out of the chain, and inevitably somebody's going to probably run their wax down to nothing and leave the exposed metal. So sometimes those cheaper chains too will end up rusting out quicker than some of these nicer chains. You can kind of, the nicer SRAM chains, you can get away with running those down to not much lube on them, and the coatings and the platings on them are nicer, and they won't they won't corrode as quick on you. So anyway, so that's one of them. Some other stuff I've got going on here. This is for kind of your direct-to-consumer bikes, your entry-level ones. They throw all kinds of parts on there that, you know, are lookalikes for some stuff, but they're not the real thing. So we had a bike come in, and this is what the brake pad looked like, chipped off. If you look at the overall shape of it, it looks like one of the SRAM version brake pads. And when you overlay them, you might think that you can use a SRAM brake pad in there. You cannot. It does not work. So the backing plate on this is actually thinner than the SRAMs, and this width right here, and it's very difficult to see it by the eye quickly, but you can see it once you try to put a SRAM brake pad in there and realize that it's not fitting. This part on the SRAM is wider. So they did a kind of a knockoff copycat, and so this bike was in for service. We need to put some brake pads. It's getting a whole new brake caliper because, I mean, we can't even recognize the name of the brake calipers that are on the bike. Not to mention, it's just a mechanical brake caliper anyway. SRAM brake pads are $30. So we can get a Shimano cable actuated brake caliper for less than $40. So it kind of actually just makes sense to do that. Anyways, which the new caliper has new brake pads, and then the next time you go get brake pads, those Shimano pads are only like $12.99. So that's an interesting one that came in. Another one, if you ride Shimano clutched derailleurs, this has been a pretty consistent service that we've had to do for most XT derailleurs that have been in the field for a couple of years. The pivot in there, so basically that clutch needs to be serviced. And this is in rough shape, but not nearly as bad a shape as we see a lot of them coming in. And we've had to service enough of these that we just started keeping these in stock for the most part, because almost any XT derailleur that's been in the field for a couple of years, these need to be serviced. And we've replaced quite a few of them. They get corroded, dried out, and then they just won't function very well again. So it's kind of a weird thing, because you're like, do I really have to service my derailleur? And it's frustrating. I personally think that we should be able to get components for our bike, like a derailleur and whatnot, that we don't have to. If you're going to service it on your own, it makes sense. But the economy cost of it for yourself, and we'll service them, but it's like after a couple times of servicing it, it's the new derailleur price. So I don't know. I think in most cases, a lot of people, we catch them once they're having shift issues or something like that, and we find these pieces, this part in pretty rough shape, and it's making it so the pivot is sticking in there a bunch and jamming, and then when you'll try to drop back through your shifts, it actually just doesn't pivot back. And then we've seen them where there's a bunch of chain slack in the bottom, because literally this pivot is seizing up. So anyway, that's on one of those, and I just thought I would share that. So I got to do a better job of looking at my camera instead of over to where this screen is at here. Anyway, let's see what else. got a few other things here. Let's do that. Got it. Yeah. So here's another one. 2 wheel sets on a frame. If they're not the same hub manufacturer, there's a fair chance that they may not line up. And you kind of wonder why. They're all designed to the same spec, but there's manufacturing tolerances, right? So there's nominal in the middle, and then there's manufacturing tolerances. And also the quality of the hub. It depends on what type of tolerances it was actually engineered to as well, and who's manufacturing it. But anyway, you'll see we'll put one wheel set in and you line the brakes up, and you put the other wheel set in and they don't align. And so we have ways to fix that. So I've had people come in and every time they adjust their wheels or swap their wheels out, they're adjusting their brake caliper. You don't want to do that. If you're in your fork, it's aluminum in there. You're going to create some wear in the threads eventually. So we've used these shims. So what we do is we put both sets of wheels in. We swap them in and out, and we find out which wheel sets the caliper out the furthest outboard. And then we set the brake caliper to that brake rotor. And then whichever wheel has the rotor that sits further inboard, then we will shim behind the rotor to move that rotor to basically the same location as the rotor on the other wheel set. And so when you put that wheel set in there, you don't have to readjust the caliper. So this is like one for a 6-bolt. And these are actually, this is from SRAM. And there's a couple places that make them. I can't remember which one. I think TRP has it. Problem Solvers probably too. A couple of them are a little different designs. But there's actually some different thicknesses out there. I like the 0.2 ones because usually there's not a lot of room there to begin with. The 0.2 usually gets the job done. I've seen them off further. Again, if you're putting 2 wheels in and they're 2 DT Swiss hubs, same hubs, and they were manufactured around the same time, they're probably going to line up. I'd say it's probably, I don't know, stuff that we see in the shop anyways, 50-50 on whether or not we need to shim one of the wheels. So this is another one. So if you have a center lock, this isn't going to work. So then we have these center lock ones from Boyd. And I've used these for a very long time, and long before we actually used Boyd wheels, but now we use Boyd wheels as well, and then we use their shims. They work out pretty good. So let's see. No comments or questions in there. If you join in and you got a question or comment about any of this, or just any random service comment or part question, like ask it in the chat, and we'll just divert to that discussion. This is, I'm planning on doing this stuff Mondays and Thursdays at 10:30, whatever's the hot topic. Sometimes Monday it'll be race reports from the weekend. Sometimes it'll be about business. Sometimes it'll be builds. If I've got a pile of like weird service stuff that happened throughout the week, or at least parts that I can show and tell, then I'll do that. So I've got some other things here too. Let me grab, here we go. So this is, we had a bike come in with a couple different issues. And actually I'm sharing these because there's a bike sitting right over here that's got 2 wheel sets that we're gonna set up on it. So, so we had a TT bike come in that's using old BB30 bottom bracket, right? And that's on a narrower frame. That straight up old school BB30 is just not wildly used anymore. We still use 30mm cranks, but you see more of them now in like 386, and it's a wider spindle. So anyway, where I'm going with that, and I'll circle back to that. This crank was in a bike, and there was wobble in the chainring. And we see this often. There's warp in the chain rings or something like that, maybe the big chainring. This one was in both chain rings, and they were in sync. This is, let me pull these off of here. This spindle is, and I don't know 100% of how they press this in there, but the crank is actually wobbling on the spindle. It's not loose, but if you look at the back side of it here, you can see where this spindle is basically pressed in, or somehow pressed or bonded into the crank. We can actually see from one side to the other on this side, it's pretty tight. If you zoom in on this side, which you won't be able to see in the video, but I can see it here, there's gap, there's space. So this spindle appears that it's working its way out. And so that chainring wobbles. But anyway, this bike had a couple of things going on to it. That was one of them. And it does need a bottom bracket bearing, but the bottom bracket bearing didn't have play in it. It's just pretty rough. While this is out, we're going to put a new bearing in. But anyways, there's not a lot of cranks anymore. We could use one of the wider spindled cranks. And you're like, oh, chain line shouldn't be that big of a deal. And in a lot of cases, you can be off a little bit, but those are more designed for new, like 142 spacing. This is a TT bike with a very short chainstay. And so if we were to use one that pushes us out too much further, we could run into a little bit of chain line issue. Anyway, but we're going to put a Easton crank in there, and that Easton crank kind of still uses that old like rim brake chain line. So, and I have one on my rim brake bike. It works great. So that's what we're putting in there. And then there was something else with, I think this is, the same bike. I don't have the wheel. I should have grabbed the wheel. But if you've heard of the phenomenon of ghost pedaling, so when the bike is up in our stand and you pedal it and we stop turning the crank, the wheel's going to spin and freewheel, right? That's what the free hub mechanism's for. This is not the wheel, but I'll just use this one to demonstrate, right? So this is going to spin and the wheel's going to keep going forward. And then something catches in the free hub and it doesn't freewheel anymore. So this hangs up and this just keeps rolling forward and it drives the chain forward now, and now the crank is spinning forward. This would have been a lot better if I had it in the stand, but this is actually the crank from the bike. It's not the crank anyway, and the crank's not in the frame anyway. So it starts ghost pedaling. Sometimes there's like, just because the bottom bracket bearings may be just so little of grease left in them and they're just crazy free spinning and not enough friction there, but there's likely because there's too much friction in the free hub, and so it's driving that forward. So this was an instance where, and sometimes you got to be careful as a shop taking this for granted, because somebody's like, hey, I dropped my chain a couple of times and I kind of like had backpedaled a little bit at an intersection or something. And you're like, hey, you probably shouldn't, you got to be careful when you're backpedaling or whatever. And it's very easy to take it for granted and write off that maybe this shifted or cross-chained or something. But you got to be really careful about it, because there's actually something going on with this one. So there was a rough spot when we rotate this by hand. We could feel a little catch in the bearings. The hub bearing felt totally fine, but the bearings in the free hub, we could feel a little tiny catch spot, and that's where it would hang up and then start ghost pedaling it. So the ghost pedaling issue probably never came up or experienced with a customer, but they happened to catch when they went to back pedal. If that hung up and didn't freewheel, you would drive some slack into the chain on the top side. You'd actually be pulling that derailleur cage out, and then when you went to go pedal forward, that slack's going to pick up and snap, and yes, you might drop the chain from the big chain ring to the small one or something, especially if you were kind of somewhat cross-chained, potentially coming into an intersection or something. But definitely a very annoying situation. The worst case scenario for that is if you let it go too long, and this is just kind of a tip, little things like that can be the signal of a problem that's starting to develop, and that it's not a bad, it's a good idea to get it checked out so that it doesn't create a bigger issue. Because worst case scenario from that is you're riding along and you stop pedaling, your free hub hangs up because it's gone too far, and everything seizes up. You're going to wrap that derailleur up over the top because your free hub's going to keep turning with the wheel. And if you're rolling 15 miles an hour, hopefully not 30, you're going to end up in a rear wheel lockup situation. And we've seen those in the shop. You can damage your bike, damage yourself. But anyways, so glad that one came in because we caught a very small problem that we just need to service the bearing in the free hub. We haven't opened it up. I think it's probably just going to be some cartridge bearings, pop new ones in. It's going to roll smooth again, and we'll service the pawls, re-grease them, wipe it all out. But that's a problem that somebody could have let go for a while and ended up in a much more damaging situation in a ride. So, but I think that is everything I have, at least kind of just in front of my face right now to chat about. I think we've been on here for a little over 20 minutes now. We open the shop here in about 5 minutes. So if there's no questions pop up, I'm going to jump off and shut this down. And thanks a lot for tuning in. I'll be back on here live Monday at 10:30. I don't know what that topics will be yet. I got to look and see. There might be some races over the weekend. If there is, and it's not enough for a whole show, then I'll touch on it. And then I really want to dive into, some of these custom projects that we have. We've got 2 new mooch frames here. One of them's for a customer. We're still waiting on a couple parts. And those Aspero 5s, I want to get switched over to Force stuff, but those are going to go on the shop floor. So the customer service stuff comes first. So, but we'll see. Maybe Monday we can dive into those and I'll pull those parts up because those zip wheels that are over there, those are going to go on one of those Asperos. So we might actually order the SWs for the Aspero we have here with this Ram Red. So, but we'll see. Anyway, if we don't see you in the shop today, have a great day. And I almost was thinking it was Monday again, but today's Thursday. So hopefully we see you in the shop before the end of the weekend. And if not, have a great weekend. Hopefully see you next week. Later.